Okay, so we're going to make the explosion blueprint because we need this to tell us that the asteroid's been hit by the projectile. Again, this is going to be animated. It's going to be animated in three ways. There's going to be a color change. Also, the explosion is going to expand or scale up, and also there's going to be a fade as well using the change in the alpha channel. So you can see here that this is a Photoshop file of the explosion. It's 40 pixels by 40 pixels, and I've just created a white circle and I've exported it as a PNG. So go back to the Unreal Game Engine. And if we have a look in the graphics, I've imported the explosion in, and then I've converted it to a sprite, just like we did with the others. And then if we look in the blueprints, I've created an explosion blueprint of an actor class. So remember how to do that. It's blueprint and then select actor, and then you rename it. So let's go back in here. So we're inside the explosion, and all we've got in the explosion in the viewport is I've just added a paper sprite, a 2D image, and then I've just put it in the center. There's no collision on it. So look in collision, no collision. But an important thing that we need to remember is that we need to create a material instance. To do that, if we go back to the materials, you would have created a material instance for the projectile. And you can see what that looks like. Well, we duplicated that and I've renamed it Explosion SP Matte. And if we open that up, it's different than the other materials because it's got parameters now. Okay, I've got the green one is a scalar parameter and a brown one is a vector parameter. So to create a parameter, dead easy, right click. For the scalar, just do scalar parameter, and obviously in the parameter's name, you can rename it in here or in here in the details panel. And make sure this parameter has got a value of 1, which you put inside here. And the color value is a vector, so type in vector parameter, you can see that. And because this is going to represent a color, you can change the color value in there. It's okay. And obviously you can change the name of it by double click on it or change it in here. And that's called color. And make sure you wire it up correctly. You might need to add you'll need to add a multiplier. Okay. So to add a multiplier, that easy to do. You could also, you could duplicate these if you wished, or to add a multiplier, just type in multiply. And all that does is it times value A by value B. So this is important because if you want to change the color or you want to change the fade, that value needs to be times by the current value of the source texture. So that's your material. And then finally, you want to make an instance of this. So to do that, right click on it and just create a material instance, and obviously rename it. And I've called mine Explosion SP Material Instance. So now your material instance is set up. So go back inside your explosion blueprint, go to your event graph. Okay. So this is the event graph. That's all been completed, but we'll work through this. So inside your explosion blueprint, you should have an event begin node. Okay, if you haven't got one, it's that easy to create. Go to add event and just add an event begin play. Then this is the important part. You need to create a dynamic material instance. Now, a dynamic material instance can be altered inside the blueprint. So drag your paper 2D sprite inside the event graph and type in create dynamic. And you can see it there. And that's exactly the same as that. Okay, and this should be the explosion sprite material instance, which you can find in here. So effectively it's using the explosion material instance inside this node. Very important, then we need to create a variable for that. So if you right click on that, you can promote to variable. That will create a variable in here. You just need to change the name of it once it's created. And then we need to connect that up to play 2D sound, which is the explosion. So if we go to the explosion sound, you can listen to that. And then finally we get to the sequence node, which will then activate 3 different animations at the same time. So that's a sequence node. So if you type in sequence, you'll find a sequence node there. And you can have add as many sequences as you want by just clicking on the activation pin to add a new one. Okay, so now we're on to timelines. To create a timeline, if you right click and type in timeline, create a timeline, and you can give the timeline a name. I'll just call mine test just for now. As you can see, I've called mine scale explosion, fade explosion, and change explosion color. So if you double click on your timeline, a blank timeline is asking for what data that you want to change. So most of them will be floating point. So click on there. You can give the tracker name if you wish, but I've left mine blank. So you can add keyframes. The easiest way is to just show you the one that I created. So for the scale, open that up. I created 2 keyframes. At frame 0, remember this timeline I've changed to 0.25 seconds, a quarter of a second. That's the duration of the timeline. And in this instance, all the animations should be the same. So at frame 0, the value is 1. And at the end, 0.25 seconds, the value is 2. You can see there it says value 2. And to go back to the event, you'll see the event graph tab. And then the output of the value is here. Now this one is to scale the size of the explosion. So I've done a multiplication. To do multiplication, right click, put in an asterisk. An asterisk is short for multiplication. And you can see that you've got lots of different multiplications, and the one that we want is float times float. There's that one there, which is the same as these, and we want that times by 1. So if you think about it, when this animation gets to the end, the value that is going to output is 2. 2 times 1 is 2, and that's pumped directly into set actor scale 3D, and that will scale the size of the explosion. The next one is fade explosion. Now this is different. If we open that up, this time it's going the opposite direction. At 0 seconds, the value is 1, and at 0.25 seconds, the value is 0. That's because we want this the alpha channel to fade to 0. So that's another floating point timeline. This time we're going to drag from the material instant variable, which we created before, and I've dragged that into and then I've dragged from here and typed in set scalar parameter value. This is going to change the value of the fader that we created in the material instance. Okay, it's very important that you put the correct name in there. And then we drag the output value from the timeline and put that into the value of the parameter. And then that will change the value of the transparency. And finally, we've got the third timeline, which is the color value. If you open that up, this is a slightly different one. You can change the color values by adding these keys, and we notice that change the colors. So by clicking on there, you can change the colors of them, and these will change over time. So initially it'll be white, then it will change to yellow at 0.6 seconds, 0.12, or half a second in, it'll change to red, and then the remaining of the time as it fades out, it's still red. So go back to there, and then finally we've created a new material instance variable, and then we set the vector parameter, and the vector parameter, very importantly, the parameter name is called color. Okay, and then compile and save, and that's all ready to go now. So in the next video I'll show you how to spawn the explosion, which will set up all these animations, and also destroy the asteroid.